Welcome back to the Ballistic Autistic Podcast. I am your host, and I think a tidbit I'm going to give away is my first name is Steven. I don't see the harm in giving away my first name, so because it is kind of brought up in today's episode because I had tried in the past a different kind of podcast format, and one of the episodes I did actually got to interview my old behavioral therapist, which was really fantastic because she has done so much for me and she's done a lot for people with autism. She's been a behavioral therapist and psychologist for many, many years. I think like 30 years, if I remember correctly. And I just thought, there's no reason to let this episode go to waste if people are finally finding this new podcast. And I just, didn't want it to, go to the wayside. So I thought I'd go ahead and kind of rehash it in a sense and bring it back for a listen because there's really a lot of amazing things that we kind of talked about. One of the things is she is also an author, and she has a great book called Quirky, Yes-Helpless, No, that talks about the different behavioral tips and stuff to helping parents and even teachers to help you cope with dealing with a child with Asperger's syndrome and to help them be more socially accepted and socially accepting your own child and better understanding of, what does and doesn't work for them. So I hope you really love this podcast, and I really hope you also take the time to maybe go look up her book. It's on Amazon. Really inexpensive, and she's worked actually on a secondary book, which we kind of briefly bring up during our podcast together, of targeted at the workplace with like HR people and how they can help them dealing with people on the spectrum. So again, I really hope you really enjoy this podcast with Dr. Cynthia Norall. All right, and now I'm sitting down with Dr. Cynthia Norall. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
I'm so happy we finally got to this. You're definitely, when I first started the podcast, you're definitely one of the first people I really wanted to sit down with because I've been kind of deep diving in a lot of different subjects, and one thing was autism because I realized like I really hadn't really taken the time to really sit myself down and really like kind of dive into the different aspects, especially vaccines. Like I've been doing like a dive on vaccines but then, like, the bigger thing was, like, at this point, really, to me, like, it's a factor, but at the point, it's like, we need to have a better understanding in, how do parents deal with kids with autism? How do adults with autism deal with the world? How, where do we, at this point, there's so many with autism, I think there's, let the science be the science, but we still need to also focus on, how we get help.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of like the main reason. So, so that's one of the reasons why I talk to you is like, so let's just start with your background a little bit. So what's your background as far as, autism?
Okay. So I am a licensed educational psychologist, and I started as a school psychologist way back in 1987. And in 1992, I really got more interested in specifically autism. And at that time, it was called pervasive developmental disorder, PDD. Sometimes PDD-NOS, not otherwise specified. So the reason why I got interested in it is we were seeing kids that were having trouble with language, but it was so much more than being able to speak. Language is only like about the words you say are only about 25% of communication. There's this whole other realm of communication that's the nonverbal communication and reading other people and all that perspective taking. So I kind of got involved before any of that was thought about. In about 1999, when I started CASE, Comprehensive Autism Services and Education, I was really looking more at the time, they differentiated out the Asperger side, so Asperger syndrome. I had gone to many workshops by Tony Atwood. He has several books about Asperger's syndrome. So I wanted to figure out how to teach the social, whatever that meant,
Right,
to these kids on that side of the spectrum. And that's when I started Friends Club. And it was specific for kids that could, I used to say kids that could cognitively handle the communication, but now what I believe is it's those that were able to communicate because even though there is the side of the spectrum that are what some would call nonverbal, it
Right.
doesn't mean that they can't communicate. It's that they have a different way of communicating. So I was looking more for the ones that would be able to do the social cognition, the social thinking, and all those types of things that actually Michelle Garcia Winter came out talking about. And so she and I collaborated a bit on kind of what we were doing in regards to Asperger's syndrome. And then it developed from that into a company that provided applied behavioral analysis, behavior therapy, vast range of services, including a school, a non-public school, and going through the different funding models. Regional Center was our biggest funder in the beginning, and then it moved into health insurance. And then at some point in 2016, it wasn't fun anymore. All these different agencies, like myself, were just finding that the different funding sources were making it more and more difficult to actually do what we felt we needed to be doing for people with autism.
So, like specifically, like they were restricting like certain specific types of treatment or therapy, essentially.
Exactly.
And they felt like this because I mean I've done like my research with just insurance is like it's kind of crazy what insurance has done. I think to the medical system. So it's like they've
Yes.
had such a manipulation. Like they were kind of closed-minded as far as what this actually does. It's like it seems like snake oil. We don't want to insure this. We don't want to pay for this.
Well, a little bit of that. I think, quite frankly, when a law was passed, an assembly bill was passed here in California that health insurance needed to pay for services for autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so Regional Center at the time was trying to figure out what that meant. So Regional Center had been providing behavioral therapies, and they had their rules, and there were different things, and they liked to make a line of what was educational versus what was in the home. And I used to always kind of say that line is blurred when you're dealing with autism because you got to look at the kid in all environments, or the teen in particular in all environments. But what happened was as Regional Center started to say, oh, well, if you have health insurance, you need to go to your health insurance to get these services. I truly don't think health insurance had any idea how many, first off, how many children and teens there are and adults with autism that would be eligible for those services. And the other thing is that it's not like you go and you get a surgery or you go and you see the doctor, but you need these services not only lifelong, but not just once a week or once a month or something like that. So I think when we got to 2016, I think the insurance companies were like, wait a minute, now we're going to put all these restrictions and only these certain people can do this and you can only do it for
It
this
just became a
certain amount of
money
time.
issue. It just,
Truly a money issue.
Yeah.
And I do like to differentiate. It was not Obamacare or what the
Affordable Care Act.
Act.
Yeah. I try to keep it like it's Affordable Care Act. That's
Yes,
like I
that's
like
true.
I don't like the political like that's just a political propaganda term. It's just
Well, and you do hear people saying, well, it's because of the Affordable Care Act. No, it had nothing to do with that. It truly has to do with the way that private insurance was viewing it. With all of that said, we did treat thousands of kids, teens, and adults. I employed about 10 different adults with autism.
yeah. I
So,
remember when I got to speak. Yeah, there was a lot of them.
yeah, definitely. It's amazing. Clients would come back and actually were working. So then I got to explore that whole realm and finished my book, Quirky, Yes, Hopeless, No at the time. And now I'm working on Quirky at Work because so many of my clients have either gone to college or had jobs like you and been successful, and some have not been so successful. So I'm looking at that whole work world. And what I'm doing now, and I have been doing since 2017, is more in the line of advocacy. So I go to IEP meetings, I consult with parents about what their children should be getting at school. I've been doing regional center assessments to get into the regional center. I'm also been doing some advocacy and helping with some hearings at regional center to get people services, especially adults. That's a whole nother realm. And then the other thing that I've been doing is working with a couple of attorneys that understand custody issues with special needs kids, in particular kids with autism.
Are you talking about like adults that need a guardianship, or are we talking about just children with divorce and custody, like a parent's going to take care of it?
Mostly children in divorce, but I have done guardianship and conservatorship.
Conservative, yeah.
And I've also helped some individuals beyond the age of 26 keep their health insurance
Oh,
based upon the need because they're not
their
able to have
current status or
exactly.
ability to take care of themselves.
Well, yeah, take care of themselves and work enough to be able to qualify to get the insurance. So, with all of that said, it's a variety of things that I'm doing. I really enjoy in some of the custody and the family court kind of educating the judge about what autism is
Oh, yeah.
and also the importance of routines and the consistency. And yes, you got two different environments, and that's what's going to happen in a divorce situation. But
Oh,
how
yeah.
we can keep the kid's best interest in mind rather than this is the better parent, this one or this one. So that's a bit about what I've been doing.
All right. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So you've been, been in the community aspect, like
Yes.
community and education for a very long time. Which, so what are some of the things that you've seen change over the years as far as dealing with either the development of children to having them developed as functional adults? Some of the techniques, some of the things that have changed over the years as far as our understanding is to helping people with autism.
Well, I do think the awareness is definitely what I've seen change. If you mention autism now, people don't go, "What is that?"
Right. Yeah, that's
Most
very
people,
true. Yeah, pretty much everyone's heard of it, especially because what is it? It's like 1 in 6 almost. No, 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 no,
well,
no.
no,
It's 1 in
I think it's 1 in 45
1 in
right
45.
now from the
I don't know why I said one in
CDC.
six.
But when you're thinking about it, 1 in 45 means in every two classrooms, you're going to have at least one.
Yeah.
So, and I may be off on the number. I should look into that. It used to be 1 in 59, but I know it's down. But with that said, also in the media, and you have people like, I believe it's Amy Schumer talking about how her husband
Yeah, that was a
has,
big thing. Yeah.
yeah. So you have a lot in the media, and you have, I don't think it's as much of this, well, what is it? So that has been the improvement. Sadly, the understanding and the attitudes towards it has not developed as far as I would like it to
Yeah.
have
It's like we
developed.
know what it is, but we still don't get it kind of thing.
Exactly. And I'd like to see a bit more understanding of that it's a different way of thinking and
Yeah.
it's a different way of kind of processing the world. And if we all could figure that out, but maybe that's what we're going to be doing in the next few years. As far as the diagnosis, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing that I've seen. There's what people need to understand, there's two different ways to look at a diagnosis of autism. One is the educational diagnosis, and the other is the medical diagnosis. And somebody like myself, a licensed educational psychologist, can diagnose it from an educational perspective. And years ago, when it first was even seen as a handicapping condition qualifying for special education, there wasn't a caveat that there has to been proven to affect the educational performance or the academic performance.
Right.
Now in the schools, they may say, yeah, has a medical diagnosis of autism. Educationally, we see the autism, but we don't see a discrepancy between their achievement and what their ability is. So because there's no discrepancy, we're not going to provide services. When that is just completely negating the fact that you've got the social issues and the language issues and the behavior issues that go along with it, that they might need some support in school. And that support sometimes is understanding and having the attitude of, okay, this kid is saying this, what do I need to be doing to help support them? So that's what I've seen is that we've changed the way we look at how people are eligible. Then you look over in the medical side, you've got the DSM-5, and it took everything. It took Asperger's syndrome, it took pervasive development disorder, put it all under.
Let's just for those who don't know,
autism
like
spectrum.
what's DSM-5
Oh.
or what was it?
Thank you. Diagnostic Statistic Manual. So it's basically the manual that you use in the medical field to diagnose medical conditions. And it's the mental health, which I have a little bit of an issue with because autism is not mental health, but it is in the DSM-5.
And I think that's actually a misconception. A lot of people might consider autism like it's almost like a mental health disorder, like bipolar disorder.
Exactly. And it's not. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. So when you're looking at it even from a medical diagnosis, you have to have history before that the child was the age of 3, that there were some issues. But what the DSM-5 did, so the diagnostic manual, is it took what used to be kind of separating Asperger's from autism, PDD, NOS from autism, and all these different categories. It kind of lumped it all together under autism spectrum disorder. I could see the pros and cons over that.
Yeah.
I think it helped some people with Asperger's get services. For example, regional center, they can't deny autism spectrum disorder no matter where they lie on that spectrum. I think it helps some get services. I think it confused things a little bit. Well,
Okay.
wait a minute. How can this person have autism when they can speak? There's
Right.
still some real misconceptions about that.
Especially the range of how it affects individuals. Like, I
Exactly.
think a lot of people are like, "Are you sure?" Like, I get that. I mean, I'm very high functioning. It's like, so it's yeah, there are some that are definitely capable of working. It's just there's those times where I put it like sometimes there's the points where it feels like it's in overdrive, like
Yes.
with the anxiety or certain overstimulation and stuff like that. So it's just like it's not like a straight linear line as to where you land. It's 4-dimensional in the aspect of certain areas peak more than others.
That's a really good way to look at it too. And what I find, especially delving into the world of work, the things that can make the autism be more challenging are also the same characteristics that can make a person be extremely good in their job if they're in the right job and they're allowed to
Zero in on their
express
interest.
zero in on their interest. I was just meeting with a family a couple weeks ago, talk about a meeting we're going to have for their daughter. And the husband looked at me and he says, I'm on the spectrum. And my thought was, yeah, I kind of knew that. And he said, so the things that can be challenging for me being on the spectrum that can drive my wife crazy make me be a really good manager in the projects that I do, because everything I do to the nth degree of detail. He said, but I've learned that I have certain ways that I need to explore with my colleagues. I'm not going to read certain things well. If you come up and you approach me, I might read your face as angry and you're not really angry,
Yeah.
or I might read that you're okay with things and you're really not okay with things. And he said, so I've learned in the workplace, I need to self-advocate for myself. At the same time, I realize how good I can be at what I do. So as I've delved into it, I can really see the advantage of some of the autism traits in the workplace.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, that's kind of like for me, because with dog grooming, big thing with me is just like I just zone in, I just can focus, hyper focus, and just work really quickly. So with that, it helps me be able to groom more dogs, which lets me make more money. Like I groom more dogs than pretty much all the other groomers. I generally groom 2 more, 3, sometimes 3 more dogs than the other do, because I just I get there, I show up, I just focus, because I just get done and then move on to the next thing.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, there are certain traits if they're utilized. I mean, that's really the tricky part. Is like, because it's like, there might be some things that employers they can, let's take coding for example. I think a lot of because majority are male and majority have in general social challenges, but they are extremely good at coding. For example, there's a lot of, I think, people in autism spectrum ASD that are in coding, and they can just that zone mentality, and they can just dive right. Especially a lot of them have hyper interest in that, and so they're able to just lock in, do their thing, and become highly efficient, and that's very good. But then you're still a person working among other people. That's now you have to deal with HR. So it's like you say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing. It's like there's that fine balance. It's like, because now it's also a legal issue. It's like what happens if I hate to bring him up, because it's been talked about, but what was his name? The gentleman that worked for Google who put out that Google memo. I can't remember his name for the life of me. I believe he was possibly autistic or Asperger's even, and I've listened to a few of the interviews. It's like he just had a very it was very simple. He was asked to give input. He put a very analytical point to it, for the most part, I looked at it. It's like it was nothing emotional behind what he put out. He's not. And I want to avoid political anything on my podcast, but this is just a prime example of he thought he was just doing something that was asked of him. He took it to the most analytical point. He cited scientific. He literally put out a college essay.
Yes.
There was a specific verbiage, and it was very minor and very seldom used. Neuropathy, I believe, was like one of the main words because neurotic is I can't say it, but being neurotic. So there was that one little bit, but because that little bit got blown out of proportion for the person he was, and the unfortunateness of media today blowing it out of proportion, that led to him being fired and the lawsuit. And I don't know from my understanding, he does have a new job and he's, for the most part, financially fine. He's fortunately not homeless, and didn't destroy him as a person, which is thankfully good. But it was just like that as an example, is like someone that hit mainstream, that had autism, that just reacted a certain way, and now it became an HR issue.
Yes. And what is really fascinating about that, and I followed that story for that very reason, because it really was not intentional what happened on his part, but it was how things were read. And that's where the collision occurs with social thinkers and what I call thing thinkers. That's really where the collision is, because social thinkers are constantly wondering, well, what's your intention? And assuming an intention, when the person who's a thing thinker are, on the autism spectrum, they don't necessarily have an intention to harm. And I can't tell you how many times I'm advocating, whether it's at an IEP meeting, it's recently in a hearing and regional center, or even in the courtroom for family court. It's, wait a minute, that wasn't the intention. Let's get back to thinking about why the person did what they did. And if there wasn't this intention to harm, why are we holding that against them and consequating them? And interestingly enough, that you bring up Google, for Quirky at Work, which I'm working on, the current book.
The new book,
The new book I'm working on. I had an opportunity to interview an HR manager from Google.
Oh.
And it was very interesting. What she shared were issues that the managers were having with the staff, the different staff that, they would come to her and they would say, I have this issue going on. And so many of those things, to me, were very autism spectrum specific.
Like actions or interactions with employees, among employees.
Well, what was interesting was they were like hygiene issues. Somebody didn't take a shower. Yeah. So it's like, she would say to the manager, well, you need to remind somebody to do it. Exactly. Or cosplay or some of these things. So it was fascinating to me, because when she went through the list of issues that she deals with, they weren't the typical kinds of HR things, which has made me want to get this book out, because I want to get into the hands of HR managers and employers in particular, for them to kind of understand you're going to deal with it differently. There's a different way of kind of approaching these
the way that they need to be approached. That's really what it is. Yes. Like, they need to be approached differently than your atypical person.
Exactly. So that's been fascinating. I can't wait to get more done on that.
Yeah, so because there's just so many parents dealing with, like, that's usually like with the groups that I joined a group on Facebook, like I mentioned before the podcast, and it's, it seems to be like the biggest challenge is like, what would you recommend to parents that are first discovering their child is having autism? What's their first set of resources? Where do they need to start going to? Because this obviously can be a lifelong thing. So what's step number one for a lot of them to kind of figure out what resources they need to get a hold of? Do you have any recommendations there?
Yes. One thing that I really want parents to remember is there is a differentiation between educational and medical diagnosis. So perhaps their pediatrician has referred, which a lot of really good pediatricians are doing now, referring to children's for developmental evaluation, and then it comes out with autism spectrum disorder.
ASD, yeah.
Okay. So that in and of itself can go to the school district, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the school district has to say, oh yeah, now they're going to get services. So they have to be able to do their own assessment. They're supposed to consider that medical diagnosis.
Right. In
order to look at what they're doing. So there's two avenues that I like to tell parents, and sometimes one is an uphill battle, and you can only battle with what you can at the time. Right. But one is getting the recognition in the school. And even if they don't qualify for an IEP because their academic performance isn't showing the deficits, then at least they need a 504 so that there's some accommodations that can be put in place for them.
And what is a 504?
A 504 is under like Americans with Disability Act.
Okay.
So it would be like if somebody needed to have a wheelchair and all of the things that they would need to have in order to access the school.
Yeah, I think my mom probably started out with that because I remember very early on, third, fourth grade, when I was first being diagnosed with autism specifically, I ended up with an aide to help me.
Yes. And that would have come under actually the IEP. So originally your mom got a 504, but then from that, they found out that you were eligible under the IEP, and then that's where the aid came. And sometimes kids do need the one-on-one support. Sometimes all they need is to have, a lot of times, is to have a safe person to go to. So the case manager of the IEP becomes that safe person. And if they're having trouble understanding something or their behavior, they're feeling a bit out of control for their behavior, then they have a safe place to go where they're not going to be judged. That ultimately is what I see for all kids, no matter where they are on the spectrum. But that's one piece. And the school piece likes to say the school day is what they're responsible for. So the other piece is the San Diego Regional Center. And so I tell parents, deal with one at a time. I also tell parents that because the San Diego Regional Center is not providing a lot of the behavioral support that they used to provide, or even any of the social support, it still is important to get into the regional center before their child turns 18, because the supports that will come after the school age time ends, so when they graduate from high school, whether that's at 18, 19, 20,
It's like that
22.
documentation, the breadcrumbs that come forward.
You've got to have that documentation ahead of time.
So, really quick to backtrack, just so that's very specific to our area because we live in San Diego. So the San Diego, what was it called again? San Diego.
It's San Diego Regional Center, but all of California have regional centers.
So anywhere in the country, especially so you're looking for your regional center that offers
services to developmentally disabled.
There we go. Okay, yeah, I just wanted this so that way this information can be used for many as possible.
Perfect. Yes, that's the general is Department of Developmental Disabilities. And every state has that type of a department. Not every state calls it regional center. California happens to call it regional center, but every state has it. Yes, definitely.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because for anyone that out of California, it's like this is because you have just such great insight. So I just thought it'd be good to this is kind of what we're looking for. That way, it's not like our state specific.
Yeah, and so you want to make sure. And we were just talking about health insurance. And the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you're accessing whatever services health insurance is willing to give you in the area of the ABA or social skills groups and those types of things. What the Department of Developmental Disabilities can do before your child turns 18 and becomes an adult is oftentimes respite care. So it gives the parent an opportunity to get a break. And that is really important because they're trained babysitters, so to speak, so that there's somebody that can come in and the parent can just let their hair down and go, okay, I can get a break.
Nails, hair, movies, dinner.
Whatever.
Kind of like what yesterday. I went and got my wife some cake from Abundant Cake or whatever it's called, and you sometimes see them where there's like these caregivers with a group of specifically with Down syndrome or other mentally handicapped individuals. So they're just kind of like a group resource to kind of take them out or watch them and stuff like that. Just, everyone needs a break. That's one thing like I brought out when I spoke with your group and everything. It's like parents sometimes get hyper focused on like the child's disability becomes their life now, and they forget that they are still a person, an individual, and have a life of their own. So they sacrifice friends, they sacrifice even their marriage.
And I have some families that just don't even go out in the community because it's so challenging, and a lot
afraid, they're embarrassed.
They're embarrassed.
What they risk every time they go out is embarrassment. I mean, I get that 100%.
Yeah, so they need an opportunity to be okay with that and have that break. And then I also want them to know that if somebody is giving you a bad time when you're out there, and that's that person's issue, it's not your issue. I mean, I'm so supportive whether I'm on a plane, in a public place or whatever, and I see a child having a meltdown. I'm so much more supportive of the parent in that moment. Because we put too much judgment and too much blame on the parent.
I think people just aren't used to being uncomfortable.
Oh, that's a good point.
I mean, like look at public breastfeeding, for example. It's like, it's a mother She's not just whipping out her boob for you to look and oogle at. She's a
No.
mother feeding a human being who could be your future doctor or something. It's
Which we
just
all started there
we've
too.
all literally, okay, not all,
Majority.
majority. This is not against mother that had done formula. I've done like there's nothing wrong with formula. This is but parents have tried, majority of women have tried breastfeeding, and the child is hungry. Believe me, the child's a lot quieter when it's feeding. So
That is true.
get over yourself.
No, and I think yes, there is that judgment that goes on the mother or the father when they're out there in public and their child is having a tantrum. So I just want them to know that I truly support them, and
And I think anyone, like, they see a child have a meltdown, they're like, well, it's a bad kid or a bad parent. And it's like,
exactly.
it's like, we have to, I think, as society in terms of, like, it's a little noise, you're a little uncomfortable. It is, yeah.
Well, and that's one thing that I really that I really want to say, and I want people to hear, is that we need what I call the social thinkers to understand, because the more people understand and the more they tolerate each other, I think the more that we'll have those two not colliding so much.
Yeah. No, it's just, yeah, it's just one of those things, like, we've been around friends that have, autistic kids when we've gone to dinner, and sometimes you just have to learn different ways of having them be distracted. I mean, pretty much, especially with a lot of boys, it's just pent up energy. It really is. But there's also the balance of, like, you can't have the tablet, and that's the main thing now.
Yes.
I used to have a Game Boy, but now it's iPads. It's like you can't have the tablet also be the babysitter whenever you go out. I think it's a very tough balance, without a doubt. I mean, that's why I personally made the decision to not have kids, because like I would, I already have autism. I couldn't imagine having to deal, like, because especially now with the research. Like I said, I've gone back and done the research a bit more, and the new thing for me was I didn't realize autism that they've discovered. Not 100% to my understanding, but it seems to be located that the development of, especially specifically, they have about 90 gene sequences that they've discovered that are tied to autism, but specifically is developing prenatally or in utero. So it's vaccines are not.
No, they are not. I still have parents. I do have some families, and there's a few.
Oh no, I know. Yeah.
There's a few of them that I'll just let them tell me how they believe the vaccine caused it. But yeah, we've known since 2000, when Eric Corshane here in San Diego did some of the original studies that he did looking at those genes. We know that it is something that happens in utero, and it's and some of it doesn't develop until about
literally the time you start getting those vaccines.
Yeah.
And it's just like the conspiracy, and it's just really. I've been trying to be fair and actually reading books on both sides. Specifically, I started out with Dr. Peter Hotez's book, "Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism," and then I read another book by another gentleman. I can't remember, but it was the Vaccine or Autism Epidemic. I read both of those. And I've been following both of the people online and just trying to understand and where it's gone wrong, and I just. When it comes to specifically vaccines, I think people just want a finite answer as to why it happened.
Exactly.
That's what it is above all else. And then unfortunately, they're focused on that. Yeah. It's like and like I said, it's like when I started at the beginning of the house, like it's already happened. Let's focus now on what we can do for them.
Exactly.
Because guess what? If it's a mass conspiracy, majority of people aren't going to be part of uncovering it. Like. Someone saw. I'm on Reddit a lot, and a young boy posted like, is the world gonna end in so years? Do we have to worry about global warming? Do we have to worry about this? It's like, look. If you're not at the forefront of changing the world and adding new technologies to fix it, worry about you, because there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Focus on pursuing a goal of what you want to accomplish. If you want to be an artist, a musician, a business person, focus on that. If you're not Elon Musk. If you're not Elon Musk, you're not probably going to be, or what was that boy's name? There's the boy that created the technology that they have like these giant, literally sea vacuums with nets and stuff that they're going to be using to clean up all the trash in the Atlantic and Pacific.
Oh, and he isn't very old either.
No, he's in his early 20s.
Yeah.
But it's like someone on the forefront of trying to change the world. If you're not there, relax. The same thing with the autism and the vaccines. Like, if you're literally not the scientist and you're not the person that like, because here's the thing. I've always my argument has been is like, so many people want vaccines to be the cause. There's lots and lots of money into trying to have that smoking gun. No one's had it yet.
Right.
So,
Well, and I think you said it very well. We're negating what we can do for them now and what we and helping others to understand them, but also to help them to understand. I just did a diagnosis of a 25-year-old, and he had kind of self-diagnosed, and after meeting with him, doing the testing, and then talking to him about it, he asked me what is one thing that he should do, and I said, stay off social media and stay off some of the internet for a bit.
yeah.
Because you're reading so many things. What I really want you to do is to, if you like movies, watch some of the autobiographies, like the Temple Grandin movie, which is a wonderful movie.
What's that one?
Temple Grandin, Thinking in Pictures, and Claire Danes is the actress that plays Temple Grandin in it, and it came out a few years ago. But what I really like, not only I think is a great story, and it helps people understand how someone with autism thinks, but the cinematography for it actually showed what she was thinking and what she was seeing.
The translation.
The translation, the pictures in
okay.
her head. And I think if somebody watches that and they understand, okay, this is how the person with autism is processing their world, I think it takes all of this intention of harm, and all these things that we put on these people.
Yeah.
And it goes, oh, wow, that's a really cool way to see the world. There really is a benefit from that.
I'll have to definitely watch this because it was the first time.
You haven't seen
No,
it?
I didn't know about
Oh.
it. The last, I just watched Free Solo about that climber
Yes.
and found out, that autism, and like, oh my God, that movie was stressful. That last like 30 minutes or so.
Yeah. And then there's the Clay Marzo's movie, Just Add Water,
Yeah.
surfer, the famous surfer. So, yeah, I like to tell people to, if they like to see it from a movie or read it from a book, to do more of those autobiographies rather than just delving into the internet right now, because for a little bit of time, they just need to come to some acceptance. And there's relief too.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So this is what's going on. This is how I think. And there's others that think like this.
Yeah. And my perception is like I said, being online is like there are definitely more adults seeking diagnoses.
Yes.
Because a lot of them believe be on the spectrum, so they're looking for assistance in that. So, what would you recommend? Because like let's say because they didn't get any assistance growing up, going through school. They're now like because you just like you mentioned, you just had someone in his 20s, was someone in the 30s or even 40s that because they would probably been 70s, 80s they were born, so that a lot of the newer stuff definitely wasn't accessible to them. What would you recommend if they feel that that's something that they need to get access to? Where should they start?
Well, that would need to be a medical diagnosis.
So primary
or
care.
somebody like me could do, because I was looking specifically for this individual for a regional center. But yes, they can go through their primary care, and that usually is a psychologist or psychiatrist that they see that gives the medical diagnosis. It's a bit easier. There isn't as a lot of testing because they're an adult.
Right.
But what they do need is do need somebody that can speak to what they were like as a child, because you have to remember
They need a personal history.
They need a
And
personal
advocate
history
for that personal history.
Yes. So either
testimony.
a parent, a sister, or a brother. When I do adults, I often, if I can't speak to the parent, I'll ask to speak to a sibling. But I want to get that history about what they were like as a child, because it's a neurodevelopmental quote
That's the
unquote
big thing,
disorder.
yeah.
And so you can't just say, oh, well, I think I have it. Well, I have to go back and I have to look.
Yeah, because and that was been tricky because some of the groups, just key reference back to social media, online social media, because it's just especially Reddit's a really popular one because of the anonymity that you can have. Like some complain about, specifically some of the adult people trying to get a diagnosis, like they kind of get brushed off by specifically psychologists. I see mostly some feel. Do you see or think that this kind of like a thing with medical professionals like trying to brush it off, or they think they're just trying to take advantage of a certain aspect of care that like, oh, you don't really have it because of the fact of the spectrum of what it is?
Well, I do recommend there's Autism Society associations in every state, and several of the big cities have their chapters. I would reach out to the Autism Society of America because they generally have lists of psychologists that could do the evaluations. You do have Autism Speaks, and there's different ways that you can think about Autism Speaks.
Yeah.
But one nice thing about Autism Speaks is that they do have a really good network, and they really do have a good list of resources.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it don't take no for an answer. Right? And hey, it's great. You tell a person with autism, don't take no for an answer. They don't generally take no for an
Like,
answer.
oh, okay, that's the go for it.
Yeah, go for it. So, there just has to be the psychologist in that area. You can also, another good resource is psychologytoday.com, because they take profiles of the different psychologists. And so you can look, autism specific in that area. So there's a couple of resources.
Okay. So yeah, that can be really helpful because it just seems because I think like the argument, if we go backtrack a smidge on like the vaccine thing, like the claim is like, well, why is it all of a sudden there's a bigger boom of people with autism? Like, I think we just didn't have the diagnosis tools as pure as that.
We didn't have that. We didn't have the awareness. And to be quite honest, and this is something I've always felt. And sometimes when I would say this, people would have their opposition to it, but there is definitely a genetic component. And there's a recent study that just came out that really does prove the genetic component. And years ago, if you were more reclusive and not as out there socially, you didn't necessarily find a partner to then have children with.
Right.
Now you have the coders, the people that are involved in internet, computer science.
There's a lot more interaction.
There's a lot more interaction. And there was this whole study that I think Tony Atwood even looked at, in marriages. So one person with Asperger's and one person not with Asperger's.
My situation.
And how that kind of happens. And then there's the opportunity to have the children, and then there's the genetic. And I know there's opposition to that feeling, but I do see in families multiple children with either the autism, the attention deficit disorder, possibly some bipolar depression, anxiety. You do see that. So, and then you go back and you say, well, what about your family history? So even this father that I was talking to recently, and he said, I'm on the spectrum. He's talked about his mother, and then he talked about his grandfather, and then he talked about, and so he just basically went back into this whole genealogy.
Oh yeah, like, well, yeah, they kind of, when we think about this person in our family
Mm-hmm.
line, yeah, they're kind of like this way, and
so I don't think we can negate that at all. And yes, there's a small percentage that you cannot find that genetic history. So then we look at kind of, what is evolution doing for us? What's our next big thing that we're going to discover out there? Well, guess what? It's probably going to be discovered by a person on the autism spectrum.
yeah, I thought it was. I'm not a personal believer in evolution, but they talked about, because like every time something about autism comes up, like they talk about certain movies or TV shows, like Atypical, Big Bang Theory with Sheldon Cooper in there. I didn't see the movie. It was one of the newer sci-fi movies, and they talked about. I guess they kind of brought up as part of the dialogue in the script about how, and I don't know how accurate it is, but like the certain genetics behind autism, because of the intellectualness of a lot of people with autism,
Yes.
the highly intellectual. A lot of people are geniuses. That's why people think Einstein and some other, very famous scientists and Nobel winners, that it is a link towards a next step of evolution or something like that, because of the higher cognitive ability of certain being able, just the overall geniusness.
Yes, and I think a piece of that, what we do know about the brain is where there's the centers of differences have to do where the connections are made to make all the kind of what we call about socially successful people. So the way I look at it is that people on the spectrum are out of the box thinkers. Mm-hmm. So, and they're trying to find a solution to something, either trying to make something more efficient or trying to make something easier.
Yeah.
But it's about that object or that thing. And so it makes sense. And like you were talking, you can focus, you can hyper focus. So if they're motivated and it's their special interest, then of course they're going to come up with a different way of doing something. And instead of holding it against them because they aren't really great socially, we need to be giving them a bit more respect for, wow, you're able to do that, for all the reasons and the characteristics that you have that also give you these challenges.
Proper utilization of their abilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just where it gets tricky. Is just the getting the opportunity because like let's say like even for me examples like I'm not business savvy. I mean to make it anywhere in this world, unfortunately, you need money. So sometimes people with autism, like myself, not the greatest with money. Obviously, much better than I used to be. But it's like it's sometimes when we hit certain roadblocks, like I have, it's like it's like oh my goodness, like you almost kind of that's where some of the downsides of having autism kick in, like with the meltdowns and those roadblocks, cutting yourself off, and
Yes.
so because you bring it up in the book, like with I have it right. Yeah. Okay. So I have the book in front of me. So the quirky yes, hopeless no, practical tips to help your children with Asperger's syndrome be more socially accepted. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of great tips in this book about with the behavioral aspect of how helping kids get moving out of that uh, breakdown essentially.
Getting stuck where
Yeah,
they get stuck. Yeah.
because that's just really tricky. So
Yep.
what are some of the big things like therapeutical wise have changed? Like, is there like stuff that's outdated that you know?
Well, kind of going back to what you were saying about vaccines, what I did see in the beginning part of my career with autism was wanting to give like a pill to make it go away.
Yeah,
So there were some
that's I
really
think Autism
strange.
Speaks is known for. They put a
Yes.
lot of money towards a cure.
Yes. And so in the beginning, I did see a lot of really weird things that you give your kids. I think we've evolved from there. I mean, there are some supplements, there are some things about the leaky gut and different
I,
things.
I actually I
Gluten.
read a dietary book specifically on the gut biome and probiotics. I've been trying to do more of that. I've been trying to do different things like nootropics for my autism. I've been trying CBD oil. I've been trying to bring again probiotics into my overall diet.
Yeah. And I think that those help the symptoms. They don't necessarily
Right.
take away
Yeah.
the autism. But yes, if we can find something that's going to alleviate some of the symptoms, absolutely. So that's a little bit of what I've seen different. I don't hear so much about the cure, and it
Yeah.
might be just the circles I walk in. It might be just the way that I approach helping and supporting and facilitating
Well,
those
I
with
think your circles are
autism.
really important because they're the professional circles. I mean, you're
Yes.
you're working with people, doctors, and those who are on the spectrum. I mean, that's a very tight knit circle where those are who are affected. I mean, like take anyone else that has no one connected to autism, and like I did, like maybe not even that educated in it. They're like, okay, they don't really know what's going on.
Exactly. Exactly. And then staying on top of the research. I think that's always important to do,
That's so
to stay on
hard.
top of that. And that has really changed. The focus has been more away from why there's autism to what are some of the indicators. And then I'm a lot of the stuff that I'm following is what are going to help some of the symptoms.
Yeah, it just sucks because like with Dr. Peter Hotez is and he's right. Like I've been trying to follow because his is one book of talking about autism and just in the sense of what it is, and then there's dozens of books in that same category of anti-vaccine or really weird home remedy stuff, like literally
Yes.
mixing bleach or weird animal,
Yes.
like just crazy out of this world, literally thinking they're going to cure their child
Yeah.
or just and it's just really unfortunate. It's like just some of the weird books, and I'm not like, and I hate like I definitely like I think everything's debatable except the ability of speech, publishing, whatever your crazy ideas are. People have to, but the problem is learning how to sift through all that.
Yes. And I think that is true. And I think I get the most pleasure in doing what I do. I love what I do, but I get the most from what I do, especially now in the role that I'm playing, where I'm sitting alongside the parents in these different meetings, advocating for the child. When the parent has an acceptance of their child and they don't let the autism define their child, and they have high expectations. And I'll have sometimes in the meeting a school person say, well, I don't know that these expectations are realistic. And I like to say, nobody ever rose to low expectations. So I like it when they have the high expectations and that acceptance that it isn't defining them. It's causing people to have to think a little differently when they approach. even in the workplace. I mean, that's what my whole book is going to be about, is how we approach these individuals. It's not how you get rid of people with autism. It's about how you use them to your benefit so that you do have a more, whatever you're
Prosperous
doing.
business even.
Yeah, for definitely.
Yeah, because I mean, like, if you got encoders that can do like triple the amount of work, you want them. It's a productivity issue.
Absolutely.
So, so I guess we can just start kind of wrapping this up because it's almost been an hour, so it went by really, really quick. And I know you got plans, and I was just really thankful that you're able to take some time away and sit down with me.
You.
So what are the so you have 2 books out as of right now. So you have the, Quirky, Yes, Hopeless, No, and what was the other one?
The one that is out as a proposal is Quirky at Work.
Oh, that's right. All right.
Yep.
And then, are you still doing evaluations and such
Yes.
so that people can reach you for that?
Yes.
Do you have any emails or Instagram or social media?
My website is drcynthianorall.com.
Okay.
So they can reach me through the website. They can also reach me through my advocacy website, which is Trio, TRIO, consultants.net. Trio, because it's the family, the individual, and the expert, me being the expert, but I work with the family and the individual. And yes, they're welcome to reach out to me. And
Oh, awesome. And there's a lot of great resources in the Quirky, Yes, Hopeless, No. I definitely highly recommend for those with young children. There's a lot of great tips. I mean, I like the little section about the different games that you put in there, like that are great for social building, even because of the interactions that the games introduce into them.
And even though it was written a few years ago, it's still on Amazon.com. You can still get it in Barnes & Noble. And yeah, definitely. And look for Quirky at Work once we get...
Any timeline on that?
Well, the proposals have been out, and we're working on more of the chapters. We're hoping within a year.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, I'd definitely love to have you on again, maybe when that comes out or even sooner, because, I mean, this is just a subject that I want to touch on more because, like I brought up in my podcast in the past, it's like, I just want to bring in interesting people that, you know, are in areas that I just have interest in, and because I think autism is definitely going to have a lot of development that changes, and, it'd be nice to have someone who's, on the forefront of that to, have someone that educated and can break it down really easily to come in and sit down and chat.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me.
So that was my little interview I had with Dr. Norall. So appreciate for y'all making it this far, and hope you really enjoyed that podcast. A little throwback, I guess you could say. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Peace.